The other element of scale that maybe people talk about a little bit less is just configurability. So if everything you do is either about customization or one size has to fit all, you can't scale. But if you think about technology as a really configurable set of capabilities, a firm can grow because as they need more, it's already there. It just needs to be configured.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Connected Advisor. I'm your host, Kyle Van Pelt, co-founder at Milemarker, and today I am joined by Molly Weiss. Molly is a group president at Envestnet, and she is now, as of very recently, a retired Super Bowl champion flag football coach. Molly, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's not every day I get to talk to Super Bowl champion coaches, so that's exciting.
It's definitely a feather in my cap.
As it should be.
Yeah.
As it should be. That's awesome. All right. So Molly, I ask every guest who comes on this show the same question. This is not going to be any different for you. So I've had hundreds of conversations on air and off air. And one of the things I love about our industry is everybody has a pretty unique path to this industry. Some people, that path might be traditional. They followed family footsteps and went about it that way. Other people didn't even know this industry existed and they came in through the side door and have thrived in it. But what I've found is whether your path is traditional or untraditional, everybody has a unique moment that we call a money moment in their life. And that's that moment where the light bulb kind of clicks and goes off and you decide, hey, this is what I want to do for my career. So for you, Molly, what was that money moment that led you to sitting in the chair you're in having this conversation today?
So it's slightly embarrassing, but maybe makes for a good story. I was an English major. And I don't know exactly what I intended to do with that. I just loved words and continue to love words. I love words. And so I was an English major. And then I went with my dad and my grandma to New York City and, started walking around and ended up, this was when you could go into the New York Stock Exchange and kind of stand in the balcony. This was pre all of the security that they have today. And something about it just caught my attention and I sort of fell in love with it. I don't know if it was the chaos or the organized chaos or the idea that it was this very controlled chaos that got me, but I just kind of fell in love. And so pretty shortly after that, I changed my major to economics. And then my first job out of college, my first real job out of college was doing trading and operations for a financial services company. So a little bit embarrassing, but I will say that Bill Krager, Envestnet's co-founder, was also an econ and English major. So I'm in good company.
There you are. I like it. If I know correctly, too, I think he also really likes words. So there's something there. That's super cool.
That's true.
Okay, so you get into trading and operations, and then you kind of work your way through Envestnet. Tell me that story, the abbreviated version of the Molly career story.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that the next thing I sort of fell into was technology because I was definitely operating on the more transactional side of things, meaning I was reconciling accounts, I was placing trades, and I was thinking about, new accounts and opening new accounts. But I was just naturally drawn to the technology that was supporting all of that. So I'd get really interested in the actual process of pulling data into the portfolio accounting system and then how you could do queries to look for, trends or to address problems, and then how we could streamline the new account opening process. So I just got really sucked into the way that technology enabled all of those functions and the way we served advisors. And so I ended up going into, at Envestnet, a much more technology focused, how do we build out technology? And Envestnet was still pretty much in startup mode. So we were cranking out code and hot patching things in the middle of the day. And it was a ton of fun. It was a great time to be a part of building a technology platform.
Yeah, what a time to be alive.
Yeah.
All right, so that's something I want to actually ask you about a little bit. So Envestnet serves firms of all sizes, from tremendous, huge gorillas of institutions down to small, scrappy firms that are starting up and doing things. And the problems, obviously, they just vary so wildly from the different types of those. But yet Envestnet has done a nice job of figuring out how to serve firms of all shapes and sizes. What do you think has contributed to that?
Well, I would say one thing is that there is commonality in what they struggle with. I don't think that there is a firm I talk to that, whether it's a small RIA or one of the large gorilla institutions, that doesn't struggle a little bit with how to manage their data and what to do with their data and how to make their data meaningful. And then on the other side of that, they're all thinking about how to serve their clients better with whether that's better performance reports or, a more personalized portfolio or a wider breadth of solutions, whether they're traditional investments or something like an alternative or a structured investment. So while they are different in the scope and scale that they might need, they're actually not coming from holistically different places. So I think that we see those common themes. And then certainly when we're thinking about, well, how do we support one of the really large institutions? It's scale, it's compliance and oversight tools. And then when we're thinking about the smaller RIA, it's kind of like increased flexibility in delivering ultimately sort of the same value.
Yeah. I think a lot of people in our industry talk about scale, and I think it's used in all sorts of different facets, right? For some people, it's just a lot of human beings solving problems for a lot of accounts and a lot of households and things like that. So when you hear the term scale in our space, what comes to mind for you, especially in the seat you're in?
I have a specific attachment to the word scale, even if it is overused, because I think that one of the things that has really made Envestnet as successful as it is that we built the platform, and this started, 20 years ago, but we built it with the concept of scale embedded. So there was the assumption that it was going to be a very scalable platform. And so when I think about scale, it's, certainly we reconcile millions of accounts every day, or it's automated, but there are millions of accounts that are reconciled on the Envestnet platform today. We process millions of trades throughout the day. So we're sending them to custodians for execution. So there's the scale in the numbers. That's an important part of scale. And that's, important not only to the big institutions, but if you think about the way RIAs are growing, the clip at which RIAs are growing, or the themes we see around RIAs coming together, that scale becomes really important. But I would say that the other element of scale that maybe people talk about a little bit less is just configurability. So if everything you do is either about customization or one size has to fit all, you can't scale. But if you think about technology as a really configurable set of capabilities, that means that not only can a firm like Envestnet grow because we're not having to put a lot of manpower or human involvement in making something work for a specific firm, but also a firm can grow because as they need more, it's already there. It just needs to be configured. So I think about that scale in numbers of accounts and numbers of trades, but also scale in flexibility and configurability.
That's great. All right. So talking a little bit about Envestnet's technology, I have the privilege of being able to record this interview with you pretty close to when the Envestnet Elevate conference is going to be happening. So we're recording this just a couple of days before. You all have some exciting announcements that are coming out there at the conference. Tell us as much as you can about what's going to be going down.
Yeah, I would say that there's kind of three themes that the Elevate attendees will hear a lot about. One is going back to my comment about configurability. We're releasing a new, we're calling it Report Studio, but it's essentially a new report writer, which will give advisors much more flexibility it's a very modular approach to creating reports, not only reports that can be PDF and provided to an investor, but also reports that can construct an online view, both for the client, the end client, and for the advisor. So increased flexibility, but also increased ability to report on different instruments. So we're really enhancing our ability to report on alternatives. And again, that goes back to data too, right? Getting good alternatives data into the system to then be able to report on it with the appropriate level of detail for an end investor is also really important to us as well. So you hear a lot about us talking about Report Studio, which ultimately becomes, for us, a new path to data visualization. So we'll start with reporting information, but ultimately this new style of modularization and configurability will apply to our proposal document and to the way that the client portal experience can be designed and a whole host of other things as well. So that's one category. Another category is we're always focused very squarely on enhancing the portfolio construction tools that we provide to our advisor users. So think of the proposal generation tool, certainly, but also the ability for advisors to create models. And really kind of taking that a step further, we're enhancing our UMA capabilities in particular. So everyone talks about UMA. It's always the buzzword. But for us, what's important about the UMA is the ability to commingle the things I just mentioned. So having an advisor be able to completely flexibly trade their own sleeve within a UMA, but then also right alongside that, be able to outsource a sleeve to a third-party asset manager and then pull in also something like an alternative investment or an interval fund. So that it's kind of like UMA on steroids. So it used to just be like, oh, here's a bunch of managed account sleeves that can be put together in different allocations or different target percentages. But now we're saying it's multiple trading entities and it's multiple asset types, like truly multiple asset types. So that's the second category. Third category, I think everyone at every conference is talking to some degree about AI. We'll talk about the way that we're thinking about a little bit internally at Envestnet, what we're doing with AI, but then certainly how it's impacting the advisor and client experience.
That's great. I love it. Very concise. So I want to talk a little bit about maybe double clicking on the second item you talked about, the UMA on steroids in some ways, but I'm actually going to take a detour and come back to that. So okay. I want to ask you a little bit, I'm sure you don't have hard data because I didn't prepare you for this question, but there's so much discussion around how advisors should be outsourcing. Like they shouldn't be spending all of this time doing rep as PM. Like you should be focused on business development, getting in front of your clients, building relationships, all of that stuff. But you see the data across, like you see the rep as PM, you see the outsource stuff. Is that actually happening? Are people outsourcing more and more and more, or are those trends kind of staying the same? Like, hey, the people that are rep as PM, they're just going to run rep as PM, and the people who are outsourcers are going to outsource? Or are people starting to come around to the idea that, hey, maybe I should not spend so much time on portfolio construction, and instead I should be much more outward facing and client facing?
Yeah. Such a great question. So the data on the Envestnet platform, or the Envestnet data, is probably a little bit biased because we do encourage outsourcing and really focus a lot on educating advisors about how to use third-party asset management. But I would say that, if you and I were sitting and having this conversation 7 years ago, 10 years ago, I think there was much more black and white to that answer. So there were advisors that they are CIOs. They see themselves as portfolio construction experts, and that is what they do. And then some advisors really believed in leveraging third-party asset management or looking to outsource to other asset managers. I think now what we're seeing on the platform is much more of a blend. So advisors for maybe a specific mandate or a specific asset class see their investment philosophy really as the important part of what they deliver to clients. So they want to maintain control over that. But then to fill in around that, they're looking to third-party asset managers or to other solutions. And so that's why the UMA is so important, is because it provides that flexibility. So the advisor doesn't have to say, well, I'm going to give up all control or I'm going to do it all myself. I think what we're seeing in the data and in the practice patterns of the advisors that use our platform is much more of a blend. And then the other thing I would say is I think that some of and this touches on what I was talking about with respect to AI, some of AI is just taking data and making it meaningful and actionable for an advisor or for a user. And so a lot of what we've been working on is surfacing up insights for advisors that help them see places where maybe it would be better if they looked to outsource a specific part of their book or a specific part of a client's portfolio. And so I think some of what before was just about the advisor's preference can be informed now based on data and also where they want to spend their time. So if they want to spend more of their time creating very custom portfolios for ultra high net worth clients, and then maybe a little bit more outsourcing for other parts of their book, I think the data can help them with that. And then certainly the tool set needs to be there as well.
That's awesome. As I hear you talking about that, and as I heard you describe that UMA on steroids thing, I couldn't help but kind of think about how, in some ways, the outside perception of this industry is that it's so simple, right? Like advisors just go hit a client to give them their life savings and they park it in a 60-40 portfolio and they go play golf or go hang out on a boat or go, do whatever all the time, right? And I just can't help but think about all of the many things that happen, in the chain of delivering advice, right? From portfolio construction to the analytics around that, to the trading, to the rebalancing, to the compliance, to the planning, to the, there's so much of this stuff that actually goes into, quote unquote, putting somebody in a 60-40 portfolio, and then the technology underneath that to help advisors do that. I mean, how do you think about that? The fact that it's like sometimes this industry gets boiled down so much when in reality, there are a lot of moving parts that go into helping manage somebody's wealth.
Yeah, there really is. And I think too that probably none of us have had the experience of saying, well, I just want an advisor who's going to give me a 60/40 portfolio and some nice performance reports. Like that,
Yeah.
no one ever said that. I think the reality is that, and that's why I think at Envestnet for sure, we think of financial planning as being an important component of everything that you just described, because the reality is that usually that's not what the client comes to the advisor with. The client comes to the advisor saying, am I going to be able to retire? Or am I like, can I put both my kids through school, or do I have to bet on the smart one? I think that the reality is that part of advisors' jobs is translating human problems into something that helps solve those problems. And it includes everything that you just said. So it's technology that helps the portfolio management process that, is also thinking about taxes and is also thinking about performance and is also thinking about life events that might change all of that and throw it all up in the air. And so I think what doesn't always get factored into the experience of the advisor or what the advisor needs is that they are a coach in a lot of ways and probably a therapist in a whole nother set of ways. And then they have to rely on firms like Envestnet, firms like Milemarker, firms like their custodians to make sure that we're providing them all of the data and the technology and the security that they need to be able to kind of play those roles with their clients.
This podcast is brought to you by Turncast. We make game-changing content for fintech and financial services companies. Learn more at turncast.com.
Hey, this is Judd Mackerel. Thanks for listening to this show. I just wanted to ask you one question. What's your technology and data strategy for 2025? If you can't clearly answer that question, I'd love to talk. We are spending some specific time with select firms to really go deep and help you clearly answer that question. We believe that it's one of the things that often holds back firms from really achieving their potential, from really achieving growth, and really getting a lot of the things in the position that they need to be. Things that are holding up the way that you scale, like your workflows, how you manage data around your revenue, how you report all of that to your advisors, and getting clarity in all those things. I'm sure there's a lot of very specific things to your business that are really important as well, and we'd love to talk about that. If this is interesting to you, hit me up with an email. My direct email is judd@milemarker.co, and I'd love to hear from you, hear what you're working on, hear what your strategy is, and see if there's an opportunity for us to help you get more clear on that strategy in 2025. Thanks.
All right. And then you can answer this how you want to, but now I'm going to land the plane on coming back to double clicking on that second thing. But I understand how somebody could package together some SMAs, or how they could package together some model portfolios, or a couple of things like that. And maybe this speaks to the power of Envestnet, but I'm trying to wrap my brain around how you're going to take an SMA from this manager, an alternative, investment over here from this manager, some cash over here, and, something else, and put some sort of direct index wrapper around all of it and just be like, and now it's in one sleeve and go. Like, that feels sort of like magic to me. So how are you able to do that with all of the different managers and everything like that, kind of manage it in one, unified sleeve?
Well, I am glad that you appreciate the difficulty of doing that, because otherwise everyone probably would have been doing it years ago. I think one important factor, at least for Envestnet, is that we have been investing in our UMA and portfolio technology for so long that if you think about it, it's kind of something that's been layered upon and layered upon. So we've effectively been building the foundation for this tool set for many years, I think. So if you think about it like that, initially a UMA used to be an MMA, or something that was like a static target portfolio that a manager could change. And then it became something that was truly an advisor-controlled UMA, where the advisor could control the allocations of the different sleeves, but they were all, third-party asset manager sleeves. And then now where we are is something that's saying, okay, take all of that and then mix it all up and make it more flexible. And so that means that you're having to think about not stepping on toes when it comes to trading. So if the advisor is going to trade their sleeve, but you've also got an asset manager or separate account manager trading their sleeve, you have to be very careful about not, commingling shares. So a lot of the work that we've done is about, making sure that you know which sleeve owns what, where the cash is in all of the different sleeve cash allocations, and then keeping them separate enough that they can be managed independently, but then rolling them up for purposes of reporting out to a client or conveying the, ultimate asset allocation and what you're trying to achieve with that asset allocation. So it's like it's a combination of extreme separatism and then finally like absolute commingling that I think we're striking that balance. And it's tricky. It's really hard.
Yeah. And now I'm gonna add a layer to it, right? Because the industry loves it. Like we've been talking about integrations for 10 plus years. And I could be wrong. I don't think it could be accomplished what you just talked about by trying to pull together 3 or 4 different systems to make that happen in one place, right? Yeah. That is something that is able to happen almost purely because you have the infrastructure and the data and the IDs of all of that thing to make it happen. But you couldn't pull together 3 or 4 or 5, third-party solutions to create that experience, right?
Yeah, and that's the value of Envestnet. So thank you for the plug. I think part of the value of Envestnet is that we want to make it easier for advisors to do that so that they're not spending their time going to one system to manage this part of the client's portfolio and then to another system to manage another part of the client's portfolio. Our goal is to bring that all into the same technology-enabled system that really helps them do that as seamlessly and as streamlined of a way as possible. So absolutely.
All right. Thank you for double clicking on that. And I don't even know if I meant to plug that, but I think, at Milemarker, this is a lot of what we see too, which is for our clients, if you want to create those types of experiences, you can't do it by daisy chaining APIs and different infrastructures and data models and all of that stuff together. It has to be something where you have control of those different data elements in some way, shape, or form. And I just think it's cool that you're doing that because that is a powerful way to construct portfolios because everybody wants alts. Everybody wants all of these things. Yeah. And they don't want to add complexity to it. So Elevate, you guys have some cool speakers coming.
We do.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So you have KDK, you have Alistair McCaw, and actually somebody who I really like, Dennis Mosley Williams. I've heard him speak a couple times. Incredible. And then you have this mystery, which I'm not going to try and pull it out of you, but a very distinguished speaker, I believe is what it said. A very distinguished speaker is giving a keynote on Wednesday, which is cool. But talk to us about the speakers. I know you don't have a favorite child, but anybody you're particularly excited about with what they're going to bring to Elevate?
Yeah, I love KDK. She's awesome. And what's, I think, exciting is she'll be interviewing our new CEO, Chris Todd. So that'll be an interesting way to kind of get to know him. And then I think we always try to bring speakers who are going to be addressing either business problems or team dynamics or sort of relationship management elements that advisors find in their practices. So we tried with the other 2 speakers to kind of bring some perspective that hopefully advisors are able to incorporate into their practices. And then I'll give you a little tease on the final keynote. He's really funny. I actually just saw him at another conference and he's very funny. And I think some of the things that he'll be talking about are just kind of the importance of bringing people together and not separating people and creating unity in our culture and in our sort of world. And I think that that's also important for, I'm sure you think about this, I think about this, how can you be as effective as possible as an organization or as a team, or if you're an advisor as a practice? And a lot of that is about making sure that you're all pointed in the same direction. And even if you have massive disagreements or disconnects, at the end of the day, if you know what your ultimate goal is to serve the client or to serve the investor, whoever it might be, you'll find success. Because as long as you're sort of united in what your most important things are, you'll be ultimately pointed in the same direction. So I think you'll like it.
That's fantastic. That's great. And I'm going to plug Envestnet because based on what you just said, we have a speaker coming to talk about unity in our culture, the way Envestnet provides unity in portfolios. So let's just bring it all together.
Thank you. I love it.
That's awesome. Okay. You mentioned it a little bit too. So I know you have a focus on ultra high net worth clients or things like that, probably some stuff that's being rolled out.
Yeah.
What types of things are you guys announcing or you're talking about when it comes to high net worth or ultra high net worth clients?
So certainly reporting is an important part of that. I do think that ultra high net worth clients tend to have more complicated and sophisticated elements of their portfolio. So being able to report on that, not only from the data, which you know well, but also the experience of the report. That's one aspect. And then the other aspect is tax consideration is often a much bigger focus for those clients. So we've been enhancing our tax overlay features, our sort of tax managed portfolio features for quite a while, which can apply to the UMA. And then, I think finally it's a little bit of what I was getting at earlier, which is being able to serve the needs that might not just be traditional investment. So whether that's an alternative, whether that's, a structured investment or something like that, being able to pull that into the client's overall portfolio, manage it, and then report on it appropriately. Those are the key kind of elements of what we're focused on.
Awesome. All right. So we're talking a lot about what's coming up here in the next little bit, but I want to move into a segment of the show and we can broaden from Envestnet. We can talk about industry as a whole, but I'm going to ask you to get out your crystal ball. I want you to peer into it. And I want you to tell me what some of the things are that are coming down the road that firms should be preparing for. And I think great leaders try to peek around corners and try to position their firms for what is coming. So what are some of the things that you're thinking about and you're trying to help position for the future?
It's so cliche, but AI is definitely something that we'll all be affected by, I think ultimately in a very positive way. But I think to not acknowledge it, it's over-acknowledged, but I think to not acknowledge it would also be a mistake. I think the questions will be, or if I was an advisor and I was listening to this, the concern is that people are saying that AI will somehow replace what an advisor does or will lessen the importance of the advisor. And I actually think it's exactly the opposite, because I think that the world is only getting scarier. And if you think about the advisor's role as being that trusted, confidant as it relates to one of the most important thing in any investor or client's life, which is their financial stability, that role of the advisor is more important. And so my expectation is that firms like mine and yours will use technology to make the advisor much more productive, much more informed, much more able to anticipate things that might happen to the client, whether that's using data or whether that's just kind of better understanding of the client, that actually makes the advisor much more effective. So yes, maybe they have better tools at their disposal for rebalancing, or maybe, generating a report is a lot quicker and better, but that's not going to decrease their importance or their effectiveness. I think it's going to increase it. So I think AI will be a big factor. The other thing I think we'll see happen more, and I think if I think about my history at Envestnet, when we first started, when we built the Envestnet platform, it really was to make SMAs more easily accessible to more advisors and more clients. That's oversimplification dramatically. But if you think about where the world was and where the industry was relative to access to asset management or third-party asset management, it was the minimums were really high, just wasn't available to everybody. It was hard. You had to go to different platforms to do it. And so I think part of what Envestnet did and participated in was this sort of revolution that made different types of investments, SMAs and then UMAs, more accessible to more people. I think we're going to see the same thing, just now it's going to be about alternative investments. And I don't just mean traditional alts. I just mean things that are not standard investments that might be right for the client's portfolio. So I think it'll be easier access to a broader range of solutions that might be right for an individual client. And then I think we'll continue to see things come down in minimum so that more clients can access them. The separate account minimum it used to be never below $100,000. And then that has come down. UMA was really invented to make it easier for a client with, enough to fund a single account to get access to a broader set of diversified investments. And I think we'll see that continue. Just now it's going to be more about non-standard assets and maybe more liquid or differently behaving assets. Could be crypto. I'm not a big crypto believer, but it's possible. But I think it will be the sort of democratization and easier accessibility that we'll see of different types of assets.
Yeah, I love that. On the first thing you said about AI, I don't mind you being cliche or whatever. I think I've said to a handful of people here, and I still maintain this position that, AI is going to continue to do what it's going to do. But I think what that's going to then pendulum swing is a much deeper desire for in-person authenticity experiences. If the tedious stuff and the rote stuff is just getting handled by AI and agents and all of that, humans are going to want experience, At least I hope so. I mean, I'm too much of an optimist to think we're not going to turn into like that Disney movie WALL-E, where everybody's just going around on little hover wheelchairs with screens in front of their faces and nobody ever interacts with anybody. So I hope we go for authentic experiences.
I like that too. I actually think the more that we can't trust what we see, meaning like if you're online and you don't know if an image is real or not, the more, to your point, we'll value when we know it, like when we're sitting across the table from somebody or we're getting a very human reaction. I think the same thing is true, that will become more and more important versus less and less. And by the way, instead of Wall-E, I like to think of Ready Player One.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's my like go-to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, well, I don't want to spoil anything for anybody who hasn't, but like the end of that book has a great message and the end of that movie. So, it's good. Okay. And then the second thing that you were talking about there, I want to ask you this, because I am bullish on alts. I'm bullish on private investments. But I think one of the reasons I'm bullish, I would love to see some of the minimums come down and all of that stuff like you're talking about. But one thing I love about them is that they're illiquid. So they're like a forced behavioral mechanism. But I think there's a lot of people trying to figure out how do we get more liquidity in alts because of this trend that like fewer and fewer companies are going public, more companies are staying private longer. There's so much capital and liquidity in the private markets, like all of that stuff. Cool, I get it. But I mean, what do you think about a forced behavioral mechanism of, hey, it's a liquid on purpose, put some money in here, let the alpha rip through that product. And you're not going to get the money out for a while. And that's a good thing.
So can I tell you a funny story that's very related? So my dad has always like been a bit of a conservative investor. So I think he would always err on the side of like a little bit more conservative than maybe his advisor would even want him to be. But he just with some of the more recent economic trends has gotten nervous. And so he had met with his financial advisor and then I saw him shortly after and he said, have you ever heard of these like alternative investment things? And I was like, well, yes, I actually have. And he was like, my advisor said that I should consider that. And I said, well, how did you get there in the conversation? And he was like, well, I'm nervous. So I wanted to either go to cash for part of my portfolio or I just wanted to like go much, much, much more conservative. In my head, I was like, so he's trying to keep him in the market, but stop the sort of emotional behavior. At least that was part of what I was kind of thinking that his advisor might be kind of getting at. And I had thought that theoretically, but the real life application of it, I think really makes the point that you're making. I think that sometimes it can be really beneficial because somebody may use it as a way to address an emotional feeling without an extreme event that's going to ultimately affect their ability to perform the way that they need to over time. So I think it's actually a good thing. I think optionality is always good too. So I think increased liquidity for when it makes sense is certainly something that we should continue to evolve to. But I kind of like the discipline sort of focus that you might get from an alternative investment.
I love it. All right. I've got one more question for you before we're going to go to what we call the Milemarker Minute. It's a series of lightning round questions that are fun. But the question is, I need to understand, what does it take to win a flag football Super Bowl? And what ages are we talking about here? So how old are the kids that you were wrangling together to win a Super Bowl?
Okay. So they're middle school boys.
Right in the thick of it.
Oh yeah. So, and actually my older son was doing most of the play calling. So I was like head coach. He was doing maybe half of the play calling. I was player substitution. And I actually think that is one of the key elements of our success because I made sure people got equal playing time and I did it in a very unified way. But when it really made the difference, I think I had the right team in the game fighting for the win.
I love it. I love it. There's an importance there for everybody about making sure you have the right people in the right seats at the right time to be successful. That's awesome. All right. Okay, we're going to go into the Milemarker Minute, a series of lightning round questions meant to be fun and lighthearted, just to get to know you a little bit better outside of the Envestnet side of things. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready.
Okay. If you could travel anywhere in the world you've never traveled to before, where would you go?
Probably I would do an African safari.
Very fun. Are you a mountains person or a beach person?
Can I give you a third? I'm a desert person.
A desert person. Okay. Like I know this is supposed to be Milemarker Minute, but you got to elaborate there a little bit.
I grew up in New Mexico. I grew up with the heat in the summer, cools down a little in the winter, but you see all the stars everywhere and you can be outside late at night and it's warm and not sticky. It's great.
Okay. All right.
And beautiful landscapes. I think desert landscapes are beautiful.
Yeah, it is actually surprising how cool it can look on different landscapes. Because I think we all get this picture of like desert from cartoons or whatever. And you're like, who wants to go stare at that? And a lot of them are actually pretty awesome.
That's right.
So I echo that. All right. You were an English major, you were a words person. Some of your favorite classic literature or, something that you think is like must-read books?
Oh man, do I have to be classic literature?
No. Sorry.
I'm going to embarrass myself again here. And this is a testament to how I feel about you, Kyle, because I'm going all in. I love the Hunger Games series. I read anything dystopian. Okay. I'm just reading the prequel that got released. I like concise words. I should have qualified that. So I am like a person, I value, if somebody can say something concisely, I give them extra credit. So that's what I look for in the books that I read. No flowery language.
Okay. This is great. This is why we do this. By the way, I also love the Hunger Games series. The movies were so-so. The books I thought were quite good. So, all right, that's great. And yeah, I love that you're like, I don't want to talk about classical literature. So yeah, that's great. I want to continue on that discussion, but I'm going to keep going forward. What is the best flavor of ice cream?
I don't like ice cream. If I have to pick, I would say coffee.
Okay, there you go. I like that. All right. You are celebrating a big win, either personally or professionally. What is the meal that you use to celebrate a huge win?
Probably sushi.
Oh, I like that. That's a good answer. It's a good answer. Okay. So we talked about Hunger Games and literature you like, but what's the best book you've read in the last year or so, or listened to?
I listened to a book called Margot's Got Money Troubles. I really loved that book. And then I actually also listened to the audiobook of the Elvis Presley's daughter and granddaughter. I thought that was really well done. It was really interesting.
Awesome. Excellent. All right. You made it through the Milemarker minute, even with me sort of throwing in some wrenches in there. So Molly, that was great. This conversation was a ton of fun. I'm looking forward to coming out to the Envestnet conference, some great announcements that you all have coming out. And thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Any last thing you want to plug before we sign off?
No, follow me on LinkedIn. We're usually talking about cool stuff that we're doing. So it's a great place to get a lot of information about Envestnet and more on what we've talked about here today.
Awesome. We'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes, along with some of your book recommendations and all of those other things. But that's it, everybody. That's been another episode of The Connected Advisor. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd be so kind, please click follow or subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to this, and leave a review on the show so that people who've never heard of this can find great conversations like the one I just had with Molly. But until next time, enjoy every mile.